I sat alone at table 9, waiting for nobody. My 30th birthday. And not one text from my family. Then the waitress knelt beside my chair, guitar in hand. "Happy birthday," she whispered. "I remember you." Remember me? I had never met her before tonight. She started singing, and the whole diner went quiet. Halfway through the song, she said my father's name. That single word cracked open a secret I buried for years. My name is Maya Sullivan, 30 years old. An accountant living in Charlotte, North Carolina, who had spent a decade convincing everyone, including myself, that I was fine alone. That night at the Yellow Booth Diner, I expected another quiet dinner. Instead, a stranger's song would unravel everything I thought I understood about my own life. The Yellow Booth was the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that only half worked, tucked 2 blocks from my apartment on a street lined with sycamores. I had eaten dinner there alone every birthday since my divorce from Daniel 3 years earlier, telling myself solitude was a choice and not a consequence of hiding who I was. The waitress introduced herself as Jordan Reyes, 29. With paint-stained fingers and a smile that seemed to know something about me I hadn't said out loud yet. "You come here every year around this time," Jordan said, setting down a slice of pie I hadn't ordered. "Rosa, the owner, keeps track of regulars. Guess that includes lonely ones." I laughed despite myself, surprised that someone had noticed a pattern I thought only I was tracking. One birthday candle at a time, alone in a corner booth. "The song wasn't just a gimmick," Jordan admitted, sliding into the seat across from me without asking. "Rosa asked me to do something special tonight. I didn't expect to mean it. I asked how she knew my father's name, the one she'd woven into the lyrics like it belonged there." And her expression shifted from playful to careful in an instant. "Small-town connections," she said simply, deflecting. "Charlotte's smaller than people think when you've lived here your whole life." I let the answer sit, unconvinced but curious. We talked until closing, about nothing important and everything that mattered. And for the first time in years I forgot to check my phone for messages that never came. Before I left, Jordan wrote her number on the receipt beneath the bill. No explanation. Just 7 digits and a small drawing of a birthday candle beside my total. I drove home replaying the night, wondering why a stranger's kindness felt more honest than a decade of birthdays spent performing happiness for people who never asked how I really was. The next morning my mother called, the first contact in weeks, only to remind me that my cousin Whitney was getting married and I needed a +1 who made sense. I hung up without answering, staring at the receipt still folded in my coat pocket. Jordan's handwriting steady and unbothered by the weight I was carrying around my own name. 2 days passed before I texted her, deleting 3 versions of hi before settling on something simple. "This is Maya. Thank you for the song. And the pie." She replied within minutes, asking if I wanted to see where she painted murals on weekends, an invitation that felt bigger than it should have for 2 lines of text. The mural site was an alley off South Boulevard, half-finished wings spray-painted across brick, and Jordan explained she'd been commissioned by a coffee shop that wanted something people stop for. Watching her work, unhurried and precise, I understood why Rosa trusted her with a birthday song for a stranger. Jordan paid attention in a way most people had stopped doing. "So how did you know about my dad?" I asked again, watching her mix a shade of blue that matched nothing I'd seen before. She paused, brush hovering. "He used to come into the diner," she said carefully. "Years ago. Before he passed. He talked about you constantly. I was 17. Bussing tables." I never forgot the name Maya. I felt my throat tighten. Grief and gratitude tangled together, learning that a piece of my father had survived somewhere I never thought to look. In a stranger who remembered. We spent the rest of that afternoon in comfortable silence. Her painting, me handing her colors, both of us aware something had shifted but neither ready to name it yet. 3 weeks became a routine. Coffee after her shifts, Walks along the Little Sugar Creek Greenway. Conversations that stretched past midnight about things I'd never told anyone. Not even Daniel. I hadn't dated anyone, man or woman, since my marriage ended. And the ease of talking to Jordan scared me more than it should have for someone who called it just friends. My best friend Priya noticed the change first, catching me smiling at my phone during lunch. "You're glowing," she said. "Who is he?" I hesitated before answering. "Not a he." Priya didn't blink. Just squeezed my hand and said she'd wondered for years, watching me deflect every question about my failed marriage with practiced, exhausted vagueness. Telling Priya felt like exhaling after holding my breath since college, when I'd kissed a girl named Sam at a party and spent the next decade calling it a mistake. That memory of Sam surfaced more often now, uninvited. Whenever Jordan laughed at something I said or reached over to fix my collar without thinking twice about the gesture. One night, walking Jordan back to her car, I finally asked if this, whatever this was, meant what I thought it meant. She stopped walking and turned to face me. "I've liked you since the moment you cried into your pie on your birthday," she said. I just didn't want to rush someone who looked like she was still healing. I kissed her before I could talk myself out of it, feeling 30 years of carefully constructed distance collapse into something that felt, for once, entirely and terrifyingly real. We didn't call it dating at first, both of us cautious. But by the 4th week I was leaving a toothbrush at her apartment and she had a key to mine. Jordan's apartment was small, above a laundromat, walls covered in unfinished canvases, and I loved it more than any house Daniel and I had owned during our marriage. She told me about growing up in Gastonia, about painting since she was 6, about a mother who called her confused, until Jordan stopped calling back 3 years ago. I told her about Daniel, about marrying him because it was easier than explaining what I actually felt, about the quiet suffocation of building a life around a lie. "Why did you leave him?" Jordan asked one night, tracing circles on my palm. "He didn't do anything wrong. I just couldn't keep lying to both of us," I admitted. She didn't push further, just held my hand tighter. And I understood that Jordan knew exactly what it cost to live truthfully, in a world that preferred convenient silence. My mother called again about Whitney's wedding, and this time I mentioned, carefully, that I might bring someone. "A friend from work," I lied, unable to say Jordan's name yet. Jordan noticed my hesitation whenever family came up, never pressuring me to come out before I was ready, though I could see the question sitting behind her eyes. We went to Pride together that June, holding hands in public for the first time, and I felt simultaneously more free and more exposed than I had in years. A coworker from my firm, Brett, spotted us there, waving awkwardly before disappearing into the crowd, and I felt a cold drop of dread settle into my stomach. My firm, Whitfield and Associates, prided itself on traditional values, a phrase partners used often, and I'd built my entire career there without ever mentioning who I loved. Monday morning, Brett avoided eye contact in the break room, and I understood, without a single word spoken, that my private life had just become office knowledge. By Wednesday, my manager Carol asked to see me, her tone clipped, mentioning client perception and firm image in the same breath as my upcoming performance review. I left the meeting shaking. Not from what was said but from what wasn't. The careful corporate language for a threat everyone understood but no one would name outright. I didn't tell Jordan right away, not wanting to burden the best thing in my life with the ugliest part of it, though she could tell something was wrong. "You've been distant," she said over dinner, and I finally told her about Carol, about Brett, about the years I'd spent building a career on careful invisibility. Jordan's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to hide to keep a paycheck," she said. I reminded her some of us didn't have the luxury of an artist's freedom. The comment landed harder than I intended, and I watched hurt flicker across her face before she covered it. The first real crack in 3 months of ease. "I'm not saying it to be cruel," I said quickly. "I'm saying it because I'm scared." And you get to leave a job that doesn't want you. I can't. We didn't fight exactly. But the night ended quieter than usual. Both of us aware that our different histories with hiding had left different scars neither fully understood. My mother finally learned the truth by accident, seeing a photo Priya posted of Jordan and me at a friend's barbecue, tagged with a heart emoji I hadn't noticed. She called within the hour. Voice tight. Is this true? I said yes, bracing for the words I'd rehearsed avoiding my entire adult life, finally forced into the open. I raised you better than this, she said. And I felt something inside me both break and settle. Relief and grief arriving together, indistinguishable from one another. I didn't argue. I simply said, I'm happy, Mom, and hung up before she could respond, unwilling to let her rewrite my joy into something shameful in real time. Jordan found me crying on my kitchen floor that night, and instead of saying the right things, she just sat beside me, letting silence do what words couldn't. I know what it's like, she finally said. My mom hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. It doesn't stop hurting. It just becomes a different kind of hurt. Her honesty steadied me more than any comfort could have. A reminder that love built on shared wounds could still hold weight, even when everything else felt unstable. My father's absence felt sharper in those weeks, wondering what he would have said. Whether the man who talked about me to a teenage waitress would have understood at all. I asked Jordan more about him, desperate for details, and she described a man who ordered black coffee and talked about his brilliant, stubborn daughter like she'd hung the moon. He never once said anything that suggested he'd judge you, Jordan said gently. He just talked like he was proud. I think he'd want you to stop hiding. That conversation planted something in me, a seed of courage I hadn't had access to before, growing slowly beneath the fear that still governed most of my decisions. Whitney's wedding arrived in September, and I decided, against every instinct toward safety, to bring Jordan as my actual date. Not a coworker, not a friend, but Jordan. My mother's face when we walked in together was unreadable, somewhere between resignation and something softer, I couldn't quite name across the crowded reception hall. Aunt Denise cornered me by the bar, asking pointed questions about phases and confusion, and I answered each one calmly, refusing to shrink the way I once would have. Jordan stayed close but let me handle it myself, her hand a steady presence at my back, present without overshadowing a fight that had always been mine to have. My mother approached us near the dessert table, and I braced for another confrontation, but instead she asked Jordan, quietly, how she'd met me. Just that. Nothing more. Jordan told the story of the birthday song, of my father. And I watched my mother's eyes fill with tears. She quickly blinked away, turning her face toward the window. Your father talked about that diner, my mother said finally. He used to say the waitress there had kind eyes. I didn't know it was you, she told Jordan. It was the first crack in her resistance. Small but real. A memory of my father softening a woman who had spent weeks refusing to say Jordan's name aloud. We left the wedding early, both relieved and shaken, and Jordan drove us to the greenway where we sat on a bench watching the creek in silence for an hour. That was harder than the coming out itself, I admitted. Watching her decide, in real time, whether I was still worth loving. Jordan pulled me closer without a word. 2 weeks later, Daniel resurfaced, calling out of nowhere, asking to meet for coffee to talk things through. A phrase that made my stomach twist with old dread. I told Jordan about the call, and though she trusted me, I saw worry cross her face, the particular fear of someone who had been left before without warning. I met Daniel anyway, needing closure more than I wanted to admit, and found him thinner, quieter, carrying guilt I hadn't expected from the man I'd once married. I always knew, he said, staring into his cup. I think I married you hoping I was wrong. I'm sorry I made you carry that alone for so long. His apology cracked something open I thought had healed. a reminder of how much of my life had been built around protecting other people from the truth. I'm with someone now, I told him. A woman. He nodded slowly. Good, he said. You look lighter than you ever did with me. I'm glad. Surprised me. I left that meeting lighter. Not because Daniel forgave me for something that never needed forgiving, but because I finally forgave myself for the years spent apologizing for existing. Jordan was waiting outside, pretending not to have been anxious, and when I told her everything, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire meeting. I thought he wanted you back, she admitted. I thought I'd lose you to a life that made more sense to everyone else. Her vulnerability surprised and moved me. You're the first thing in years that's made sense to me, I told her, meaning it completely, watching relief soften every line of tension in her shoulders. Work grew harder as autumn settled in, Carol assigning me fewer client-facing accounts, always with a reasonable excuse, always somehow related to nothing and everything at once. I documented every incident quietly, unsure what I'd do with the record but unwilling to let it disappear the way so many quiet injustices had disappeared before. Jordan, meanwhile, received an offer to show her murals in a gallery in Seattle, a career opportunity she dreamed about since art school. Arriving at the worst possible time, she told me hesitantly, watching my face for reaction. And I forced myself to be happy for her even as panic bloomed cold and fast in my chest. It's just a conversation, she said. Nothing's decided. But we both heard the way her voice lifted when she talked about the gallery, about a bigger life waiting. I told her to go, meaning it and hating myself for meaning it, unwilling to be the reason she shrank her future the way I'd shrunk mine for years. I don't want to choose between you and my career, Jordan said. Frustrated. Why does it always have to be one or the other for people like us? Her question hung in the air, unanswerable. A truth neither of us could fix no matter how much we loved each other in that small apartment above the laundromat. October brought my mother's first real visit to my apartment, unannounced. Holding a casserole dish like a peace offering she didn't quite know how to present. I've been going to a support group, she admitted, staring at her hands. For parents. At the church on Providence Road. I didn't know how else to understand. I hadn't expected this. Hadn't imagined my mother sitting in a folding chair every Tuesday, trying to learn a language she'd spent 60 years refusing to speak. I'm not there yet, she said honestly. But I'm trying. Your father would have gotten there faster than me. He was always braver about people than I was. It wasn't the acceptance I dreamed of as a teenager, but it was real, imperfect, and human. And somehow that made it easier to believe than a perfect apology would have. Jordan's Seattle decision loomed larger each week, gallery emails arriving with deadlines, and I watched her torn between the life she built here and the one waiting there. Come with me, she said one night, half joking, half serious. Watching my reaction carefully, I laughed it off, though the idea lodged itself somewhere I couldn't quite dislodge. I have a career here, I reminded her, though even as I said it, I wondered whether Whitfield and Associates deserved the loyalty I kept extending it. Carol called me in again in November, this time with a written warning citing unprofessional conduct that named no specific incident, only vague dissatisfaction with my presentation. I recognized the language immediately, the same careful corporate code used to push people out without ever saying the real reason plainly enough to be challenged legally. I asked directly if this was about my personal life. Carol's silence answered more clearly than any words could have, confirming what I'd suspected for months. I left the office that day and didn't go back, calling in sick for 3 days while I decided what my 30 years of careful compliance had actually earned me. Jordan found me on the couch surrounded by old resumes, and instead of offering solutions, she just sat with me, letting me be angry before being practical. You built a career hiding, she said gently. Maybe it's time to build one you don't have to hide inside anymore. Her words settled deep, uncomfortable and true. I thought about my father, about the diner, About a man who talked proudly about his daughter to a stranger, wondering what he'd say about the woman I'd become. I drafted a resignation letter that night, not out of impulse but clarity, finally naming, in writing, the discrimination I'd absorbed quietly for the better part of a year. I sent it to HR with documentation attached, not expecting justice, just refusing to disappear silently the way the firm clearly hoped I would eventually do. The response was immediate and defensive, offering a severance package contingent on my silence, a final insult dressed as generosity, which I refused without hesitation. Priya, paralegal, connected me with an employment attorney who confirmed what I already knew. I had a case, though pursuing it would take months I wasn't sure I had. Jordan's Seattle gallery show was scheduled for December, and the timing felt cruel, forcing two enormous decisions to collide at the worst possible moment in both our lives. I can't ask you to give up Seattle for my mess, I told her. And I can't ask you to give up your career for mine, she replied. We sat in painful silence, both of us aware that love, however real, didn't automatically solve the logistics of two lives pulling in different directions at once. My mother, unexpectedly, became the person who talked me through it, sitting at my kitchen table with tea, telling me she regretted every year she'd spent afraid of her own choices. Don't let fear make this decision for you, she said. I did that with your father once. I still think about the years it cost us. Her honesty surprised me. I hadn't expected my mother to become an unlikely source of courage, but grief, apparently, had taught her something about regret that she was determined to pass on. Jordan's flight to Seattle for a preliminary studio visit was scheduled for the following week, and neither of us said much as I drove her to the airport. This isn't goodbye, she said at the gate, though her voice cracked slightly on the words. I know, I said, though neither of us fully believed it. The apartment felt enormous without her, silence stretching into corners I'd never noticed before. Every unfinished canvas a reminder of a future suddenly uncertain. I threw myself into preparing my case against Whitfield and Associates, gathering emails, timestamps, witness statements from coworkers who'd finally found the courage to speak once I had. Brett, surprisingly, submitted a statement confirming Carol's comments about client perception, admitting he'd stayed quiet out of fear before realizing silence made him complicit too. A week later, Jordan called, her voice different, uncertain. The gallery loved the work, she said, but Seattle doesn't feel like it fits anymore. I don't know why. Don't decide based on me, I said, though my heart leapt at the possibility. Decide based on what actually makes you happy, not what makes this easier. You make me happy, she said simply. That's not nothing. That's not something I'm willing to trade for a gallery in a city I don't even love yet. I told her to take the time she needed, refusing to let relief make her decision for either of us, wanting this choice to be entirely, unmistakably hers. While she deliberated, my case against the firm gained unexpected traction. A local news outlet picking up the story after Priya connected me with a reporter she trusted. The headline read, Charlotte accountant alleges discrimination after coming out. And within a day, my quiet, careful life became suddenly, uncomfortably public in a way I'd never chosen. My mother called immediately, and I braced for shame. But instead she said, I saw the article. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. Hearing those words undid something in me I hadn't realized was still holding on. 30 years of careful bracing finally allowed to exhale for the first time. Whitfield and Associates issued a statement denying wrongdoing, but 3 former employees came forward within days, confirming a pattern the firm had clearly hoped would stay buried. My attorney said the pressure alone might force a settlement, though I found myself less interested in money than in simply being believed after months of gaslighting. Jordan flew back from Seattle earlier than planned, showing up at my apartment unannounced, paint still under her fingernails from a mural she'd started before leaving. I turned down the gallery, she said before I could ask. Not because of you. Because I realize the life I want isn't in a bigger city. It's here. I asked if she was certain, unwilling to be the reason for regret later, and she took my face in her hands, steady in a way that silenced every doubt. I've spent my whole life being told my choices were wrong, she said. This is the first one that's ever felt completely, unmistakably right. I believed her. We spent that night talking until dawn, mapping out a future neither of us had dared imagine 3 months earlier. Tentative but real. Ours to build slowly. December brought a settlement offer from Whitfield and Associates, substantial enough to fund a fresh start, along with the mandatory policy change my attorney insisted on including. I accepted. Not because the money erased what had happened, but because the policy change meant the next person like me might not have to fight alone. Carol resigned quietly 2 weeks later, and I felt no satisfaction in it, only a tired relief that the machinery of quiet discrimination had, for once, actually broken. My mother asked, hesitantly, if she could meet Jordan properly, not at a wedding or in crisis, just dinner. An ordinary invitation that felt extraordinarily significant to both of us. We chose the Yellow Booth Diner, and Rosa, recognizing us, gave us the same corner booth where the song had started this entire unlikely chain of events. My mother ordered pie, the same slice Jordan had once brought me uninvited, and the three of us sat together while Rosa hovered nearby, smiling like she already knew. Your father would have loved this booth, my mother said quietly, looking around at the cracked vinyl and dim lighting. He always said the best truths happen in diners. Jordan reached for my hand under the table, and for the first time, my mother noticed and said nothing, which somehow felt like the largest gesture of acceptance yet. Rosa came by near the end of the meal, setting down a slice of pie none of us had ordered, saying only, "This one's for your dad. On the house." I asked Rosa, finally, how well she'd actually known my father, and she smiled the way people do when they're about to hand you something precious and overdue. He came in every Thursday for years, Rosa said. Told me once that if he ever saw you sad and alone on your birthday, he wanted someone to sing to you. The revelation stole the air from my lungs, understanding suddenly that the song hadn't been coincidence or spontaneous kindness, but a promise my father made before he passed away. He asked me that years before he got sick, Rosa continued. I told Jordan the story when she started here. She just never had the chance until this year. Jordan squeezed my hand tighter, and I realized the twist that had started our entire relationship wasn't chance at all, but love, planted by my father long before his death. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment alone with the grief and gratitude crashing over me simultaneously, understanding my father in a way I never had before. When I returned, my mother and Jordan were talking quietly, heads bent together, and for the first time I saw the shape of a family I hadn't expected to have. That night, driving Jordan home, I told her I finally understood why the song had felt like more than kindness. It was him, I said, loving me before I could. Jordan nodded, tears in her eyes. I felt like I owed him something, she said. I didn't know it would turn into loving his daughter instead. Life's strange like that. We moved in together in January, combining her paint-stained apartment above the laundromat with the quiet, careful order of the home I'd built entirely for myself. My mother helped us move boxes, an ordinary act that would have seemed impossible a year earlier, humming along to the radio while Jordan hung her first canvas on our wall. I started a new job at a firm that had actively recruited talent from diverse backgrounds, a small thing that felt enormous after a year of hiding to survive. Jordan opened a small studio downtown, teaching weekend classes, her murals slowly becoming recognizable landmarks across neighborhoods that once felt too small to hold either of our futures. We hosted our first dinner party that spring. My mother, Priya, Rosa, and Daniel, oddly enough, all crowded around a table that represented every version of my life colliding peacefully. To Maya, Daniel said, raising his glass, who finally stopped apologizing for being exactly who she was always supposed to be. Everyone drank, and I let myself cry. My mother stood up next, glass shaking slightly in her hand, and said words I never thought I'd hear her say aloud in front of people I loved. I spent years afraid of losing my daughter to a life I didn't understand, she said. I almost lost her to my own fear instead. I'm grateful I didn't. Jordan took my hand under the table again, this time in full view of everyone. And no one looked away. No one flinched. No one made it smaller than it was. That summer, we returned to the yellow booth for my 31st birthday, requesting the same corner booth out of habit that had become, quietly, a kind of sacred ritual. Rosa met us with 2 slices of pie this time, sliding into the booth briefly to tell us she'd never seen a promise take 3 decades to fulfill so beautifully. Jordan handed me a small wrapped box across the table, and inside was a ring, simple and unadorned, nothing like the elaborate proposal I might have once imagined for myself. I don't need a big gesture, she said. I just need you to know I'm choosing this. Choosing you. On purpose. Every single day. Starting with this ordinary diner. I said yes before she finished the sentence, and the whole diner, regulars and strangers alike, erupted into applause the way small towns do when they witness something true. My mother cried harder than I did, and even Rosa dabbed her eyes with a napkin, muttering something about criers ruining her mascara before hugging us both tightly. We were married the following spring in a small backyard ceremony. No elaborate venue. Just family. Friend. And a guitar. Jordan insisted on playing herself during the vows. My mother walked me halfway down the aisle before handing me off to no one, insisting I walk the rest alone. Because you've earned choosing your own path completely. Rosa catered the reception with diner food, insisting nothing fancier would properly honor the story, and we ate pie for dessert instead of cake. Exactly as it began. Daniel attended, seated beside Priya, both of them toasting a friendship none of us had expected to survive divorce, betrayal, and an entirely unexpected education in honesty. My mother gave a speech thanking my father, wherever he was, for planting a seed of kindness in a diner that took 30 years to bloom into a wedding. I watched Jordan across the yard, laughing with my mother over something I couldn't hear, and felt the specific, quiet joy of a life finally built on truth instead of fear. We didn't have a fairy tale beginning. No meet cute without complication. Just a woman who sang because her boss asked her to, and a stranger who happened to be ready. Looking back, I understood that every obstacle, my mother's fear, my career's cruelty, Daniel's ghost, Seattle's pull, had been necessary weight, testing whether this love could hold its shape. It held. Not because it was easy, but because both of us chose it again and again. In diners and airports and courtrooms and quiet kitchens at 2 a.m. My father never met Jordan, never saw the woman I became. But somehow, through one small promise to a stranger, he gave me the exact gift I needed most. Rosa retired that autumn, handing the diner to her niece, though she still visited every Thursday, sitting in our booth, watching new stories unfold the way ours once had. Jordan's murals now stretch across 3 Charlotte neighborhoods, each one, she told me once, secretly containing a hidden detail from the night she first sang me a song. My mother attends Pride every June now, holding a sign she made herself, standing beside women half her age, unlearning 60 years of fear one march at a time. I think sometimes about the version of myself who sat alone at table 9, convinced solitude was safer than truth, and I wish I could tell her to wait. Wait for the song. Wait for the courage. Wait for the family you build instead of the one that almost broke you. It's coming. It's closer than you think. We adopted a rescue dog that winter, naming her Pie. An inside joke only Rosa fully appreciated. Watching her waddle around our small backyard chasing nothing in particular. Priya became Jordan's closest friend outside our marriage, the two of them conspiring on anniversary surprises that always somehow ended up involving diners, guitars, or terrible karaoke. Brett, of all people, sent a wedding gift and a card apologizing for his silence, admitting my case had given him the courage to leave Whitfield and Associates himself. My mother now keeps a photo of Jordan and me on her mantle beside one of my father, saying she likes to think he's finally met the daughter I became. Every birthday since, without fail, Jordan sings the same song at the yellow booth, and every year, a little more of the fear I used to carry disappears. This year, our third anniversary, Rosa's niece asked if she could record the song for the diner's new regulars, a tradition now instead of a single act of kindness. I said yes, understanding finally that some stories are meant to be passed forward, not kept small and private the way I once tried to keep my entire life. My mother sat beside me that night, humming along though she didn't know all the words yet, learning them slowly the way she'd learned everything else about loving me. Jordan finished the song and knelt beside my chair again, just like the first time. Except now there was no secret left to crack open, only love left to keep. Happy anniversary, she whispered, and I realized the girl who once sat alone eating dinner had finally, completely, become a woman who never had to eat alone again. I think about my father often, about the promise he made a teenage waitress, about how far one small kindness traveled before it finally, quietly, changed everything. Some birthdays start with silence and end with a stranger's song. Mine did. And somewhere between the silence and the song, I finally learned how to come home. I sit in that same corner booth now, not alone, surrounded by the family I built from courage, forgiveness, and one impossibly kind promise kept 30 years late. This is not where my story ends, only where it finally, truly began. One song, one truth, one unafraid heartbeat at a time, for the rest of our lives. Fendi.